Recognized professional speaker, educator, and trainer, and has given keynotes, workshops, seminars, and educational sessions to hundreds of professionals at conferences, training events, and within our own organization. He's currently the CEO of the Camp Counselor and is one of the most sought after consultants in training workers and hundreds of campers through thousands of staff and administrators across the world. He has articles published in trade journals and on various industry websites and is a pioneer faculty member on the Expert Online Training. He's also an award-winning author of the best-selling book on summer camps and youth development, S'more Than Camp. That's a pretty good title, by the way.
Thank you very much.
And he's also a contributing editor to Happiness, Diversity, and Autism, practicing practical strategies for inclusion. He's also a self-proclaimed sneakerhead. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Scott Arizona.
Thank you, Corey. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, you see those crates in the background there? Those are all my sneakers. And you forgot one big piece of my bio that is really important, which is, let's see if I can get them in the picture here. These three. In fact, for most of the folks on the webinar, these are the reasons why I probably have any credibility at all, because I'm a parent of three here at home. I have a 9-year-old little girl named Linnea, a 6-year-old little boy named Desmond, and a 4-year-old little boy named Griffin. So if we get into some camper stuff, you'll probably hear me talk about them. In fact, just so everyone knows, I'm actually headed later today up to my camp for our week of camp. I run a 1-week program for kids with autism. It's a traditional resident camp program, but it's for kids with autism. So a lot like the camps that you guys are running, as far as 1 week, mostly volunteer, that kind of stuff. And then I'm taking my own 2 big kids up to my camp, the camp that my wife and I both grew up at in northern Michigan, called Camp Algonquin. I'm taking them up on Sunday to my daughter. It will be her 4th summer there, but her first time going for a whole week. And my middle son, Desmond, will be, he's going to mini camp, which is a 3-4 day experience up there as well. So anyways, I'm a camp guy. Thank you guys so much for having me back for this particular webinar. I'm really excited about the content here because it's all about what do we do now, kind of wrapping up the summer. For most of us, we've finished our camp season. There's a few like me that maybe still have a program running, but almost everybody is, here we are mid-August, is starting to wrap up, and we have to start now thinking about, all right, so what are we going to do? And how are we going to do it? And after we, get home and sleep for a couple of days and maybe say hi to our spouses and significant others and other family members that haven't seen us in, the last 10 days, or for some of you, maybe the last few weeks or a couple of months. Now we have to figure out, okay, how do we kind of kickstart the process for next year. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. There's a number of people who submitted questions with their registration, so I thought I'd just go ahead and start there. It's really interesting to read through those questions because there's some kind of running themes, and so we'll talk a little bit about that stuff. And then, of course, I just saw Aston's chat pop up. If anybody has questions along the way, please put them in the chat. I'm not going to be paying attention to that. Aston will be, and then he'll text me if there's any questions that come up along the way, because I'd love to hear from you and have any kind of real-time conversation that we could possibly have through this webinar. So at any rate, again, I appreciate everybody's time, and I hope this next hour can be useful for most. So in the questions that people are asking, there was a couple of running themes around evaluations. What do we do at the end of the summer? How do we get some of that feedback? And what's interesting is there was some a few other questions that I kind of feel like dovetail with that, and with that question as well, which is how do we keep our volunteers and our staff sort of involved and engaged and motivated? And then a third idea that was also sort of attached to that same line of questioning was about camp culture and how do we change it, especially when there's some problems with it, and how do we sort of move forward? Those were all the sort of thematic type questions, and I'm going to put those over there for a second because I think we'll probably spend the lion's share of time talking about that. There was one question that came up about parents that have sort of different custody situations, and I kind of wanted to just start with that because there's I think some basic answers to this question, but it actually might bring up some things for other people. The question was, when a camper's parents, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at a separate screen, so I'm not looking away from the webinar, but I'm looking at a separate screen to read the answer or questions. So it says, when a camper's parents have split custody, how do you recommend handling camper pickup when the parent who signed the camper in says no to the other parent picking them up? So It's like kind of standard these days to have a lot of crazy custody situations coming at you. And so, my best advice around this and how we handle these kinds of things is to really look at a couple of different things. One, you want to actually see it. If it's contentious, if the parents aren't getting along, and if the parents if you're hearing different things from different parents, which sounds sort of like the situation here, I always request to see the custody order. It's usually written in fairly plain English. I don't have to send it to my lawyer to figure it out. It usually says one parent has this kind of custody, one parent has this kind of custody. This is okay, this is not okay. And so I like to arm myself with the actual facts as opposed to just like listening to one parent's kind of quote unquote side versus the other parent's quote unquote side. I like to see that stuff written right in front of me. So we often ask just to have those orders. We've actually even added it to our application that if there's a different custody arrangement that has been ordered by a judge or anybody else, we want to see that. And so I would say that it kind of starts now in how you're setting up your application, your parent communication systems, all that kind of stuff. So think now that we're at the end of the summer, think about going into next year, sort of arming yourself with the right information. Because at the end of the day, you and your organization can really only do what sort of legally has been set up for this particular kid. You can't go above and beyond those things unless, of course, you feel like they're in some sort of imminent danger, and then all of you are mandatory reporters. I know in some states you might not be, but I just sort of like saying that every camp person is a mandatory reporter. And so, of course, if you think there's some safety issue to not release a kid to a particular adult, I don't care what the custody situation is. That's always going to be a call that you as a sort of childcare provider, a youth development professional, that's a call that you have to make every day on the ground. Whether or not we can actually release this child to this particular person right now. So above and beyond that, thinking about kids' safety, look at the actual language. And then if the language says something clear, then you know how to respond to all the different questions and arrangements. If it's not clear or if it sounds like things may have changed, my best advice, again, is to have just very open and honest communication. So in this particular situation, it says they have split custody, which I'm guessing means, a few days at one parent, a few days at another parent. The parent who signed the camper in says no to the other parent picking them up. I would want to see that written. I'd want to see that that's not okay. And if it's not okay, I would call the parent back, or I would not do this via email, not do this via text. I would get on the phone and actually talk to the parent that signed in, and I would say, well, according to the custody arrangement, I have to, I'm able to release to this particular parent, so I want to understand why you're requesting me not to, and if there's sort of some other conversation that you need to have. In that situation, I would also call the other parent and say, hey, what's going on? According to this custody arrangement, it says that both of you are able to pick up. I have the other parent telling me not. Now, the suggestion that I just made puts you kind of right in the middle of this weird family dynamic, and I want to recognize that. But let's be real with each other that we're taking care of their kids, and so we are kind of already in the middle of their family dynamic, and we really need to be responsible to keeping this kid safe physically and emotionally. So that's the guise under which we're doing this. If the parent says something about the other parent can't pick up, well, we got to understand why, because again, legally, I can't stop a parent from picking up their own kid. So I have to understand why. So that's where I would start. But the reason why I want to start with that particular question is because it leads us into all the other sort of streams in the questions that came back, because that's about having a system and a process that you set up literally right now. Camp people were sort of famous generically for taking kind of the end of August and September, and if you want to make a joke about it, the rest of the fall, until at the very least New Year's Day, kind of off. We kind of go dormant during this time. And I totally understand that. I'm a camp guy too, right? I haven't even done my camp yet. I've spent the whole summer doing trainings and consulting work. So I know how it feels, and I know we're all tired right now. But August and September is absolutely the very best time to do high-level thinking around your systems. You're fresh out of it, so you know some of the challenges and obstacles with anything, parent communication, social media, and how are you using it during your week or two of summer, your application process. A lot of the things that came up about volunteers and keeping them on board. I mean, all these things are really fresh in your mind. So right now is the time to really develop some systems around what are we going to do, what are we not going to do, how are we going to fix it. If we use just the custody situation as an example, again, right now I would go all the way to the very initial point of contact with the parents and all the way through the application process and the drop-off procedure, and really think through what do we need to do when we have sort of different or interesting custody arrangements. Where are the points of contact? How do they find out what's okay and what's not okay as far as a parent receiving information? And really start right now from the very beginning. Is it appropriate to put something on your website? Is there a whole parent section where it has that kind of information? Would it be better to load up social workers and other folks that you may work with at the hospitals or clinics to then deliver some of that kind of more detailed kind of information about camp? I mean, we all run really different programs and we're doing things really differently. So just thinking through where are some of those initial point of contacts for parents? How can we start sharing some of that information? And then once we get them into the application process, how much can we capture from them when they're just online at home doing the application themselves? And how much then what do we need to do when it comes to reaching out and having a conversation with them? So that's kind of where I would start with setting up that high level flow. The other thing that we need to think about here in August or sort of at the end of our camp season is how we communicate. This is a soapbox I feel like I've been trying to stand on for the last couple of years. I haven't made too many squawks about it, but I'm gonna sort of squawk about it right now. I think that we rely too much on digital and electronic communication right now to parents. I understand how easy it is. Again, I'm a camp director too, so I understand that I'd much rather just send all the information in an electronic parent handbook and PDFs and nice, colorful emails that our camp director, Kristen, puts together that really highlights all the different things they need to know. I don't want you to stop doing any of those things because I think that's important. But I also want all of us to rethink about picking up the phone and having a call with parents. I know it's logistically hard. I know most parents will sort of drag their feet and don't necessarily want to do it. But in my experience, both from the parent side as well as the camp director side, we do a couple of things. One, we get the information that we're really looking for. Two, we can create a trust and a credibility factor with parents that an email can't. So when I'm on the phone with a parent and I can ask questions about their kids or things about their routines or things about their medication or whatnot. Now, remember, I'm dealing with a different population than you guys, so my questions might be different than yours. But one of the biggest piece of feedback that we get is that it's not necessarily the answers to the questions that we give. So if a parent asks us, how do you handle this or that? It's not necessarily the answers that we give that buy us that credibility or trust. It's actually our questions about their kids that develop that credibility and trust. And as a parent of three fairly typical kids, that totally resonates with me. I'm that same parent, I'm the same camp parent that doesn't do their forms and doesn't really read all the emails and whatnot. And you would think of anybody, I would be the one that would read all the stuff from the camp director sending me all that information, but I don't. And I'll tell you that the one phone call that I did have with the camp director who was asking me very specific questions about my kids, whether she wrote that information down or not, I don't even know, but it made me feel really good that she was thinking about my kids coming to her camp. So I think one of the sort of big systems that we should set up now in regards to how we're communicating with parents is taking that time to really reach out and have a conversation. For most camp people, even for folks that are running only 1 week of program, it seems like an overwhelming idea. For example, on Monday, we have over 100 kids coming to our camp this week. And to think, man, how am I going to make the time to talk to each and every one of those parents, sometimes multiple parents, and have this, what sounds sort of like an in-depth conversation. Well, there's a couple of hacks that I want you to use in thinking about this. One, there was a lot of questions about volunteers, and I'm going to get to some more ideas about how you keep volunteers engaged. Well, one of the biggest problems with volunteers is that we want them for very specific things, but those aren't always the things that they want to do. So we have to be better at helping other people help us. One thing that I think some of your volunteers would get totally jazzed about is having one-on-one conversations with parents of kids that are either returning or maybe in their cabin or whatnot. And you could actually sort of drive that conversation. So getting volunteers involved in this conversation would be awesome. You can create almost a script of all the different things that you kind of want somebody to ask about in those conversations, and then of course, ask them to take notes around what it is that they're finding out about kids, whether it's routines or anything new going on at school, or how their medical care has been over the course of the year, or how their prognosis has been, all those sorts of things. I think that would be a great way to use volunteers. And again, I started by saying it's this overwhelming idea, and for some of you who serve way more than 100 kids, it can be even more overwhelming. So create the system. Here we are in August. You have 10, 11 months to talk to every one of those parents, some of which you already know the kids are coming next year. So start talking to them, create that relationship. If you create the system now, it's way easier come May or June or July, whenever your sort of 11th hour is, to feel like you've sort of completed the stuff. Since I'm on this topic, I want to go ahead. I'm going to go off a little bit on some of the questions and basically the idea of creating a calendar. So when Aston and Don and Jennifer and I kind of were talking about this particular webinar and the idea of sort of, okay, now what? It's after camp. What do we do? Something that kept coming up was this idea that it's like a slow start in the fall, is that most of us, if not all of us, have a bunch of other things going on. Camp's not the only thing that we do. So it's not like we all of a sudden, here it is August 15th, and now I can just think about the 1 week of camp for next summer. I got other stuff going on in my organization. And so it seems like we hit the pause button a lot at this time of year, get a bunch of other work done, and then maybe, I don't know, November, December, start thinking about it again. January, February, start thinking about it again. And then it feels like this kind of rush in the late winter, early spring, whatnot. So one of the things that we started doing with my organization a long time ago, and we sort of cultivate it year in and year out. I'm just going to suggest that everyone does it. Is basically calendaring your camp year, and you start it right now. There's no reason to wait to September or wait till October to do it. Just start it right now. And here's my suggestion: you take all 12 months of the year. And as best you can, right now, and again, I would suggest you start it now because camp just ended for most of us, and so it's all kind of fresh. And just write down everything that you can imagine that you either want to do or should be doing, or have done in the past during each month. So what do you normally do in August? Is it just sleep? Is it absolutely nothing? Is it just look at evaluations? What do you do in September? Are you gearing up for a reunion, or I don't know, other things that you might be doing? What do you do in October? Is it, sort of the intro to the camp dates or whatever? And just start writing it all down. And then hopefully what you'll see is if you can spend an hour or two doing this, it's of course not going to be complete. And I know that freaks out a lot of you because there's a big significant percentage of us in youth development, particularly in camping, that are list makers. And for all of you list makers out there that just heard me say the list isn't going to be complete, you're like, your heart started to flutter. And I know I'm just like you. I really want my list to be complete. But unfortunately, when we're talking about a calendar and your year in and year out, I'm just going to say it right now, and you're just going to have to bear with it. Your list will never be complete. So sorry. I know how that makes all of you feel because it makes me feel that way too. So starting with the idea that your list will never be complete, write it all out, and then take your months and see if you can come up with like a theme for each month. Like, what are you doing in that month? And sometimes it's going to be generic. It's going to be like camper recruitment. Other times it's going to be really specific, like doing all the staff interviews or whatever the case may be. But see if you can come up with like a theme. And the reason why it's helpful to do a theme is because you can kind of be able to step back before a month and look at that horizon. Like, what is the whole month of October supposed to be about? Yes, there may be some random things that don't fit nicely into that theme, but what's that month supposed to be about? And so what are my generic goals? So if the idea is we're going to go hard on camper recruitment and new volunteer recruitment, those are going to be the two things we're going to do in this month, X month. Okay, so what are the sort of generic goals in that? Well, I want to get to at least my numbers for last year in campers. I want maybe, I don't know, 10, 20 new kids or new family inquiries anyways. Staff, what are we going to do? Or volunteers, how are we going to do it? Just big general ideas around goals. The reason why I want you to do that is because then you can take those two big things and you can kind of marry them to your list that you started and do a week by week, day by day to-do list for meeting those goals. What you're doing is you're breaking things down smaller and smaller so that each and every day when you have your Camp Tall Tree 2 hours that you have in the afternoon to work on camp for next year, you have some real life immediate goals right in front of you. Here's what I'm going to get done today. Here's what I'm supposed to get done this week. Here's how this fits under this monthly goal. Now, for those of you that are running around doing all kinds of other things during the year and camp is not your sole focus, this will help you. It's just a time management technique. And I sort of liken it to writing. For those of you authors out there, for anybody who's ever done any writing in a sort of a publishing kind of way, not just journaling, you know that the sort of writer's block, waiting for creative inspiration or whatever, is a total myth. Almost every author will tell you it's not like that. What you have to do is you just have to write. You have to write every single day. So you have to just get in there, and what you write might be terrible and you might want to delete it as soon as you write it or whatever, but you just have to write. Same goes, in my opinion, for our sort of professional side projects. And for a lot of us, camp is our kind of professional side project. Now, it might be part of my job. It might be what I'm getting paid for. But I mean side project in that, again, for most of us, it's not our sole focus. So for those that are like that, we have to just make the time every single day to do some camp. I think if we can do that, it prevents this stopping and starting type feeling that happens around this time of year in camp. Just put it in your calendar every day from 1 to 3, or every day first thing in the morning, or whatever your flow is like. You're going to block off an hour, you're going to block off 2 hours, and that's your camp time. If you've done your work around your calendar, then now what happens is you have stuff to do during that time slot. And I'm not saying things don't come up. Of course, things are going to come up with your organization. Of course, there's going to be things you don't remember, but now you have ways to sort of slide them in. The other good thing about calendaring this whole idea is that as things come up throughout the year, when you go to COCA in November, you're going to get all inspired by Chris and Jack and Steve, I think, who are going to be out there. And of course, everybody, each other, we do so much great networking, so much great discussing, but you come home and, you come back in November and you're like, I got all these ideas. And, camp's in July. So it's easy to sort of fizzle out, right? At the end of November, when we get into the holidays, all that kind of business. So if you've done your work around the calendar, then even in Fargo, in November, what you can do is, as you get this great idea, you're going to have a place to organize it and put it. You're going to like, oh, staff development. I put that in the month of May, so this is a great idea for training. Bam, I'm going to put it right there. Now I have it to work on. I'm going to file it in maybe my May file, or I have a training ideas file, or whatever the case may be. I'm going to put a little note there that says, here's where all the stuff is. Bam, you have a place to organize it and go. Again, that's my big suggestion around the calendar, and just sort of time spent. How do you prevent that stop and start? Well, you just do it every day. Now, again, I know that it's not that inspiring all the time to work on, what's going to happen, next July at the end of August. I mean, yeah, of course, it's hard to look out that far. But again, you guys all know that feeling come mid-spring, late spring, early summer, where we're all freaking out because we haven't had the time to do everything that we need to do. So this, I think, will decrease your stress and sort of mitigate that freak out. One of the questions that's sort of related to all of this that came up a few different times was just about evals. How do you get an evaluation from campers and volunteers? How do you get a good evaluation from staff? How do you get more camp participants involved in the evaluation process? What are good resources for pre and a post camp evaluations? Those are all actual questions that came up on the thing. So evals sort of thing, it's tempting to think about evals as like a compartmentalized thing, like, oh, it's just like the one thing that we do at the end of the week or whatever. I think it's part and parcel of this whole calendar idea, the entire experience of summer camp, because really, if you really break it down, like, what's an evaluation? What are you asking? You're asking, like, well, what was your experience like? Like, the answer to that question, whether you're talking about campers or volunteers or parents, is like essential to everything else that we're going to do. For those of us with thin skin, I totally understand that it's hard to hear some of those challenging type things. They didn't have such a good experience or whatever, but that should give us pause to think about what are we doing in the future. Now, before we get into sort of resources and how it fits in, I want to be careful about something in that you can't change everything you do because you get a couple bad evaluations. You've got to take sort of everything with a grain of salt. And I've been a part of a couple of processes, and I'll share them with you now about how do you find like the real info out of evals. One process is just to understand that the top sort of 10%, you know, the real glowing ones where everything was awesome, everything was amazing, you know, like it was the best experience ever. And like the bottom maybe 10% or 15%, like everything was awful, you know, I had a terrible time or my kid had a terrible time or whatever the case may be. I often sort of cut those two off. I mean, I read them and I try to take them to heart, but I definitely don't change anything based on those two things, because those are either our like raving fans and raving lunatics, or are the folks who are never happy in any situation, no matter what we do. I find the very best information to be somewhere in the middle. And so I try to take those and use those to think clearly about anything that we're going to do. The other process around evaluations that I've been a part of that I sort of swear by, I couldn't recommend sort of more, is doing what's called a SWOT analysis, SWOT analysis, and it's strengths, weaknesses, I think opportunities, and threats or something like that. You can Google it, and there's lots of different ways to do it. But if you have an opportunity, whether it's informally, just you and maybe somebody else in your office, or more formally, where you're inviting in parents, kids, maybe volunteers, whatever, to do a SWOT analysis armed with the information from your camp evals, that's where you get some of the very best ideas about maybe some processes we might change and things like that. So I started by saying I wanted the eval process to not be compartmentalized and for you to put it into your calendar. And here's sort of why. Each one of those things that you decide is an actionable item, something that you want to do more of because everyone said it was awesome, something that you want to change because people were saying that they didn't like it, starts now with the processes that you put in place. So if you've done the first part of what I talked about and started working on your calendar, started creating your lists, as things come out of the evaluation process, let's just pick on one. Drop off and pickup. Sometimes parents can have all kind of nightmare issues with drop off and pickup, whether it's not organized or whatever. So let's say that comes out of your eval process and it's like, wow, we didn't do a good job with drop off. Everyone felt scattered. Nobody felt like where they were gonna go. Seems like something you could say to yourself, okay, I don't have to worry about that till June because our camp's the first week of July, so I'm going to put it in my June calendar. Here's what I would say is that pick apart why drop-off didn't go so well. And it's not just the flow physically on the first day. It goes all the way back to what did staff and parents expect about drop-off in some of the initial conversations they were having. What information went out over the course of the year about drop-off. And then, of course, physically on the ground, did you run through drop-off with your staff and all that kind of stuff? Now, those three ideas belong in different places in your calendar. So that's what I mean by taking these evals and really stretching them out. I promise I'm not just looking at my phone for phone's sake. I think it looks like we have a question that came in. It says, we have a question. They would like to hear about staff evals by camp director to counselor during the week of camp. Great. We'll slide right into that in a second. Because the next little bit was about evaluations from campers and volunteers, and about how you get more involved. So let's talk about those first, and then we'll slide right into camp director or supervisor, depending on your situation, to staff. How do you get more campers and volunteers involved in evaluating the program? One big trick, one big hack that I want to give you right now is have kids and even staff or volunteers do evaluations before they leave. One of the things that's incredibly hard is to get people to respond to stuff after the fact. If you can have them do it on closing day, the last morning, the last full day, have staff sit down at rest hour maybe and run through a paper thing with each kid, have staff fill out a paper thing. If you're more digital folks and you want to do Survey Monkeys and get all the iPads out, kids can, do the evals there. However you want to run it is great. Somebody did ask about resources, and I personally think like SurveyMonkey type, SurveyMonkey.com is an online survey situation that works really well. I personally like the digital ones, but again, coming up with any evaluation that you want on paper or digitally isn't necessarily about the format. It's more about what you're asking. And so really dig down into that. What do you want to know? We go through all of it. We go through drop off or drop off all the way to pick up. We talk about evening activities, meals, the whole deal. With the parents, we talk about communication. Ask each other when you show up in November at COCA-I. Ask to see each other's evals. It's something that we should definitely be sharing with each other because we can always learn. So that there's some ideas around resources there. Getting more people involved, I would do it at camp. I would do some sort of giveaway with parents, create a special t-shirt or special sticker or something that we know kids are going to want, and say, hey, if you do, have a flyer at the end of camp that you hand out and you say, if you do this online survey in the next 2 weeks, we'll send your kid a water bottle with, Camp Tall Trees splashed across it or whatever. Do that in front of the kid, show the kid the flyer, show the parent the flyer. Pretty much guarantee that the kid will, sort of pester to the point where the parent will actually do the evals. We find that giving stuff away drives, increases the participation. And then the other thing that you guys can do, your community in particular is amazing at this. All the various family functions and things that you're doing throughout the year, whether they are reunion based for camp or other programs that you're running, whenever you get that extra 5 minutes with a parent that you know is a camp parent, I'm very big fan of just doing informal, hey, tell me a little bit more about your kid's experience. And then I try to take some time to write some of that stuff down. So that's kind of how I would think about or deal with some of those, the getting folks involved questions, and the resources questions. So let's for a minute slide into a different kind of evaluation, which is how are we evaluating our volunteers or staff? And sort of what should we do? So there's a couple of big ideas here that you sort of need to take on in order to do this and do this really well. The first thing is that everybody, whether they've been coming for 30 years or this is their first year at camp, should receive some sort of formal evaluation from their supervisor. Now that can be really weird, especially with our camps, because sometimes supervisors are supervising people that are not only way their senior, but have been there for a lot longer. So we really do need to have some training around this, whether it's you need the training because you're the direct supervisor, or you're training unit leaders or head counselors or whatever you might have at your organization so that they can evaluate staff. We need to do some good training around this because it's important that everyone understands how they did and how they fit into the camp experience. The fact of the matter is that we have 1 week to do this, for most of us anyways. We have 1 week to do this, and we're relying on all these folks, these volunteers, to do it. It's not just us. So we definitely need to be able to give some feedback around what went really well and what we really need to change. So that's kind of the first big one. Everyone should get an evaluation. The second big one is that everything that you say, you meaning the supervisor, so either you or the people who supervise frontline staff at your camp, everything that is written down on a formal evaluation should not be a surprise. Meaning that we should be active enough of supervisors. We should be on the ground and having enough real-time conversations with volunteers and staff that anything that we say or write down on evaluation is not a surprise. They've heard it before. And I'm talking about the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. So if a staff member is chronically late to things, they should know that. They shouldn't be finding out that you know that they're always late on the very last day when they're getting their evaluation. If they are really amazing at leading all group activities, they should not have to wait to hear about how good they are at the end of the week on their evaluation. These things are things that we should be saying all the time. So that's the second big one when it comes to sort of evaluations. It's everyone should have one, and nothing on that formal evaluation should be a surprise. Which brings us to sort of, okay, if I'm doing those two things, how do I do that? So there's a couple of different things I want you to keep in mind. Difficult management conversations, and then sort of the training, or really oftentimes training means practice. So let's really talk about that. Without me going into a whole thing around difficult management conversations, because frankly, we could do an entire webinar just on that. I've done 3-hour sessions just on that topic. There's some really basic ideas in a more difficult conversation when you're actively, saying to somebody you're not doing it the right way. So the best way for me to describe this is to put you guys all in the position that you've all been in. Every single one of you have been on the ground having a hard conversation with a kid about their behavior. And there's some certain things that we do during that conversation that I want us to mirror during the conversation that we are having with adults. So in a conversation with kids, one of the very first things we do is we identify what the problem is, but not in a "you did this, why did you do it" kind of way, but in sort of like a, almost questioning, right? Like, what happened? Well, why did you get in the fight? Or why are you so upset? Or oftentimes we know the answers to that because it went down right in front of us. But we tend to approach kids in their behavior in more an inquisitive kind of way. And I think that's a great start with staff, because one of the things that we often think when it comes to volunteers and staff is that we not only know what happened, but we have this feeling like they knowingly did something wrong. Oftentimes that's not the case. So we're just going to lay out what we think is the problem, and we're going to ask good questions about it. We're going to be like, it seems like you've been late, every morning to breakfast. That's really tough on your co-counselor and the rest of the units, or the rest of the cabins in your unit, because they sort of feel responsible for your cabin. Sort of, what is that the case? What's been going on? So I'm basically laying out there that you're late every day. But I'm doing it in a way that gives you the opportunity to sort of respond and say, here's what's going on. The next step with a kind of difficult conversation with staff is one of the hardest ones for supervisors, which is just listen. The reason why it's so hard is because, unlike having a kid conversation, they get defensive, like a kid conversation. They get defensive, but unlike the kid conversation, is we don't expect a regular adult, a grown-up, to be defensive about bad behavior. We expect them to be like, yeah, sorry, I'm late. I won't be late tomorrow. Because that's how adults are supposed to handle themselves. But they don't. They kind of, get defensive as well. So really just listen. And then sort of combine the two and then say, okay, I hear what you're saying. And it seems like you've been late to breakfast every morning. So somehow you need to do something differently so people don't feel like they're late every day. And so what we're doing there in having this sort of feedback session is helping them develop something that they're going to do to change the perception. Even if they are saying, no, I'm not late. I was changing pee-pee laundry. I was walking slow with the one homesick kid. I was checking with the nurse about whatever. All those things might be valid, but doesn't mean that your co-counselor didn't show up with all the kids by themselves and still kind of fell on a hook. So maybe it's just more communication, maybe it's whatever, but you're allowing for some real-time feedback. So that's how I want you to sort of deliver some of these conversations in real time. And then, of course, do your best to have your clipboard out when you're walking away and make some notes, because this is what belongs on a written sort of formal evaluation. Um, the reason why I want them to be written is because also, while we think we have amazing memories, and it's just me, I'm just the director, I only ever have 20 volunteers, I know all of them, I know their ins and outs. None of that stuff is true. You're going to forget in 2 weeks from now. Like, so there's the real nitty gritty of some of those evals. So just write it down. Have a written evaluation. The other big problem people have with evaluations is just time management. Is figuring out when am I going to have time to sit down with each and every volunteer over the course of the last, I don't know, day or two of camp to really deliver this in a meaningful way. So I want you to think about your leadership structure. Is there a way to sort of diffuse it? Can you have an assistant director or a program person or a head counselor or somebody else doing 2 or 3 of the people that they supervise? If the answer is yes, then great, but you have to kind of go through at the very least the quote unquote training that we just did here. You have to give them some ideas about how to do it, so that people are being evaluated sort of by the same standards and with the same measure and all that kind of stuff. That brings up sort of standards. What do we evaluate them on? Well, you could probably guess this about me, but I'm really not into like standardized tests. I don't think everyone should be like evaluated on responsibility 1 through 5. You get a 4. What does that mean? I don't know. I think that people should be evaluated on based on what we think a good counselor does or is. Write it down. Like take 10 minutes after this conversation and think about some of your very best counselors you've ever worked with and start writing out what it is that they did. Like, what are the expectations? Like, what do I want from a really great camp counselor? What do I want from a really amazing program person? And just start writing those things down. And what happens is you start to develop what I would call just expectations. Then what we do is you can take those expectations and you can kind of formalize those in staff training. Here's how we want you to do all these things. And then your formal evaluation process is looking at, well, how did you do? You're going to come up with all kinds of things, right? The very best camp counselors are creative. They're on time. They're organized about things. They're great team players. They like work with each other. Great. Don't set it up that's like, oh, teamwork 1 to 5. No, well, what does that really mean? Like, what does great team play at camp really mean? Well, they talk to each other a lot. They include each other. And then make those things the things that you're really looking for. You're going to train them on the front end how to do it. You're looking for them to implement those ideas during camp. And you're saying at the end of the week, hey, here's how we did. If you can do all those things, and again, set it up now so it's not all overwhelming in July, then you're going to have staff and volunteers that really understand what it is that it means to be a great camp counselor at your camp, but also how to do it during the week and a measure of how they did at the end of the week. That is going to help with some of these other questions about how do we keep people engaged throughout the year. I already told you, my biggest thing about volunteers is that we have to help people help us, right? One of the biggest pieces there is not just to blanket email everybody every time you have an event saying, hey, who can come? But have an individual conversation with each one of your volunteers about how they want to be involved over the course of the year. We've got events, we've got fundraising, we've got like logistical organizing stuff come spring when we're going to kind of get into it. We got program supply ordering. We have, think about it. Where are you going to get the list that I just rattled off? Your calendar that you already made. Once you start having these conversations with each individual, you're going to start to get an understanding about how it is that they like to be involved. Then you can have a more targeted ask. So you might have college students that live a state away. It'd be inappropriate to have them come into the office to file stuff, but could definitely come and do an event on a long weekend, a holiday weekend anyways, and that might be what fills them up. If you can help people help you, they're going to be way more apt to sort of stick around. And you're not just going to be relying on that sort of inspiration, motivation from that 1 week of summer. You're going to be like, look, we're part of these kids and families' lives all year round, right? So how do you want to be involved? How can we do it? And really start to individualize the sort of volunteer plan for each person. I mean, I'm not going to kick at you all the generic stuff about how you keep people involved. Facebook and emails and inviting people to reunions and, all that stuff. You do all that stuff already, and I'm willing to bet that most of you still find there's like a drop off in volunteers and whatever. So all that stuff is good. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying that you've got to get real creative, and we got to say to this individual, hey, you're important to the experience of these kids and families. Whether we're talking about that 1 week during the year or during the summer, or the couple events that you do during the year, or the fact that you fundraise $1,000 every Christmas from your family or whatever. Like all those things fit in a really important way. I want to make sure that you're just as involved as you want to be in our organization. So let's sit down. We're gonna have a 5-minute conversation about what lights you up when it comes to Camp Talltree and how you're gonna be a part of us during the year. If you can have those conversations, it's gonna go way past Facebook and way past email and all that kind of stuff. And then of course the basics, that you might already do, but make sure that every one of your volunteers feels like they're part of the community, and that you're sending birthday cards, you're sending random stuff. Again, any branded stuff that you can little tchotchke stuff or big stuff like sweatshirts or water bottles. If you can randomly send that kind of stuff throughout the year to your volunteers, that really lights people up. People love that kind of stuff. For whatever reason, stickers are really big right now. Get a bunch of stickers with your logo on it and just randomly mail it to people with a little post-it note saying, hey, we were thinking of you. If you can do those kinds of things, people feel way more involved in the community. We've only got about 15 more minutes, and so I really wanted to get to something that I think this entire conversation has led to, which is creating camp culture. Generically, in the big idea, what you're doing is you're creating camp as a community. This is where some of the typical camps out there, the YMCAs of the world, have it way easier than us because, they're capturing staff for sometimes 8-10 weeks of the summer. And often they're capturing staff at a way generically younger age, right? College age kids, which I know some of us do as well. But just sort of generically across our industry, camps like cancer camps or camps for kids with hemophilia, or my camp, camps for kids with autism, we tend to have an older population of volunteers, not necessarily just all your 19-year-olds. And so we have to work on creating culture and community in a way that other folks don't. Don't get me wrong, there's some challenges to having a bunch of 19-year-olds in the woods for 10 weeks as well when it comes to your culture. But, we have to work on it in a different way. So all of these things feed into your camp culture. Right? When you're methodically moving through your year and paying attention to how you're talking to staff, or the communication that you're sending out to parents, or how you're getting kids excited, or the videos that you're putting out, or whatever you're paying attention to throughout the year, that directly feeds how people feel about the culture at camp, like what their expectations are of what's going to happen at camp. So we're building the whole time, throughout the whole year. Even if your camp is only a long weekend in July, you're building all year long to that experience. What people bring in as far as their expectations are huge to how they feel in that space, in that moment. So think about it like that. Now, I want to get to this particular question in specific, because it says, how do I fix long-standing, deep-rooted problems within our camp culture? All right, so a couple different things. One, camp culture is hard to change. It's not something that you can do in one season. It's typically not something that you can do in a couple of seasons. It's more like we have to create some goals for where we want the culture to be, and then we have to start steering the ship. You probably have all heard that analogy where, for a big cruise ship, it takes almost a mile for it to turn, 180 degrees in the ocean, right? It has to do a big long arc to turn, right? Camp is kind of the same way. From things that from the outsider's perspective seem like little and insignificant, like the way you sing the song at lunch, to really big things, how big, closing ceremony and all this other kind of stuff. All those things are part of camp culture, and they can be really hard to change. For those of you who are the new person at your camp, whether that was this summer, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've run into well, this is how we've always done it kind of feeling and approach. And it can be super frustrating, especially when this is how we've always done it isn't good. Like this question is alluding to, these long-standing, deep-rooted problems. So what do I want you to do with all that? Okay, one, I want you to identify what you want to change. I'll give you some examples of other camps. Everybody is a volunteer. They're all like real adults. Now, I'm not trying to be disparaging to college kids, but y'all know what I mean. They're all like actual adults. And what happens is they come in and they get all drunk the night before camp, and then no one's really ready to go on opening day. Another classic one is that the 3, 4, 5 guys, could be girls too, but the 3, 4, 5 staff that always work with the older kids, they have kind of this too cool for school approach, and they sort of seclude themselves, and they kind of almost like they run their own program for the week. They just don't do all the things that all the rest of the camp does, and you kind of think it's this combination of like entitled and lazy, and it doesn't look really good and all that kind of stuff. And on and on. Like those are just some classic examples of what I would call sort of deep-rooted, long-standing problems. So one, you're working on all the expectations of what camp is supposed to be like for kids and for volunteers. When it comes to some of these deep-rooted problems, let's talk about what it's like for volunteers. And what I want you to do is identify what we're going to change. We're not going to have any more drinking on camp. Not the night before, not when kids are there, not at the banquet on the last night. And because it's bad for kids, it's bad for us. We don't need it. We're only here for 7 days. We don't need to have all this drinking on camp. So we're going to change that. That's the goal. That's how we're going to change the culture at camp. What needs to happen starting right now is you need to start having conversations, and they need to be very real. We need to start calling people out. Half of you are really worried right now. I just sent up a big red flag because you're like, yeah, but these are volunteers. They make our program happen. How can I turn to them? Half of them won't come back next year if I say we can't have the big party at the beginning of the summer or beginning of the week. You're not going to like what I have to say. Okay. Maybe they're not there for the right reasons if they wouldn't come back because we can't have a party. We're not there to have a party. I understand that we love each other. I understand that for some of your staff, they've grown up together. I understand that this is the only week they get to see each other sometimes throughout the year, but that doesn't mean that they're actually good for kids if they're willing to say, nope, I'm not going to do the whole experience if I can't get drunk with everybody the night before. So not only having those goals, but drawing some serious lines in the sand and not capitulating on those. Not if it's not okay, it's not okay. If we want to change a part of the culture, we're gonna look to change it. It starts with having some of those conversations, building up those expectations, and then asking, are you on board for this change? If you're worried that half your staff aren't going to come back, well, okay. First of all, I think good riddance. Second of all, I think it's August 15th. We're going to spend way more time this year than we have in the past recruiting new volunteers. And you know what I'm willing to bet? I'm willing to bet that if you change what in quotes here, long-standing, deep-rooted problems with your camp culture, if you start working on changing some of those things, you're not the only one that's identified this as long-standing and deep-rooted problem. I'm willing to bet there are legions of volunteers who have slowly fallen off, who have slowly not come back because of these issues at your camp, whether it's drinking or anything else, or there's weird cliques that happen at camp or all kinds of stuff. So start talking about it now. Start developing some strategies and ideas and techniques for how we're going to change it during the summer. And again, have some of those conversations now with staff. And then think about your training opportunity. The opportunities that you have, whether it's only a couple of days before kids come, whether it's an evening a week for a couple of weeks, a weekend retreat, doesn't matter the format, doesn't matter the timing. I'm talking about training. When we get everybody with us and we say, here's all the stuff you need to know, start thinking about what the message is going to be around this change in culture and how we can pull people together. So for example, if your message, or if the deep-rooted problem at your camp is that it's real cliquey, and it's like vicious kind of cliques, like people clump up, they don't let anybody in. Every time we get 10 new people each year, 5 of them don't want to come back because they were treated so poorly by everybody else. Well, think about what we can do in training or prior to training to sort of mitigate some of that. Of course, we can talk about it, but could we do some big brother, big sister type programs throughout the year within the staff, mentor, mentee? Could we do some exercises during training that pull people cross-click together? Could we take people out of some of their really traditional or historic roles at camp and put them in a different role? Again, I know some of you are thinking, yeah, but if Scott doesn't do the CITs, he's going to freak out because he's done the CITs for 15 years. Well, if Scott is so attached to the CITs that he's willing to not come back to camp because you want to have him be a part of some other group, maybe he's coming to camp for some other reason other than to deliver this experience to kids. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And then I guess I'm going to kind of leave you guys with that idea because in my experience, whether it's a change in culture, not asking somebody back, having a really difficult management conversation, even fighting with my own organization, like the board or whoever else, to sort of take on something new or to change the direction, the simplest idea that it always comes down to in any of those realms is like, what's the experience for the kids? Like, that's what we're doing. Like, how is this helping with the mission of what we're trying to deliver for kids? If it's some idea that you can clearly articulate, which is bad for them, I mean, you wouldn't have written this question if it wasn't, fight for it. And then when you're having that conversation, just bring it down to the ground and be like, this isn't about kids, this is about adults, this is about you, it's about funding, this is about this, it's about that. I'm trying to recognize the very basic thing we do, which is deliver a pretty sweet experience for kids. And if you want to break it down even farther, it's not even just delivering an experience for them, it's helping them create connections, create relationships between each other, between adults and them, between everybody in their environment. And then if you start and end with that, that's your why. If you can start and end with why are we doing this, whether you're having a conversation with an individual staff member, a family, a board member, you're dealing with camp culture, whatever it is, you start and end with, here's what we're doing, here's sort of why we're doing it for kids. There's very few arguments against that, right? Yes, people might not like it. You might get volunteers that walk away. You might lose donors, all those things, but well, what are we doing it for if not that? And then again, for a lot of you, that conversation gets a little bit more complex when you have to think about the greater organization and how it fits into the other programs that you're doing and all that. But it's still just as simple. I would imagine it's not easy, but let's be real about the simplicity of the idea of what we're trying to do when it comes to camp. And again, I want to be very clear with what I'm saying here. Camp, the idea of summer camp is simple. But it is, as every one of you know on this webinar, it's not that easy to deliver camp. So look, I hope everyone has had a good time. Eston, I don't know if there's any other questions that I can cover here in the last little bit. I tried to hit all the stuff on the questions that people submitted beforehand. But again, I appreciate everyone's time. I hope this was helpful for y'all. I'll wait for Aston or Cord or somebody to tell me that we're all good. And meanwhile, you can watch me drink coffee.
Hi, Scott. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking your time to come out or speak to us today. I know that I'll have a lot to go back to my camp with, and I'm sure other people will too. Some action items for the attendees. We'll be sending out a survey shortly, and we'd appreciate your feedback, what you've taken away from this, and some things we can do to make the next experience even better. We'll also have a webinar coming up in October to get kicked off for COCA conference. So be on the lookout for that as well.
And if you fill out the survey on this webinar, maybe Aston or Don or somebody will send you a COCA sticker.
That is correct. We're going to walk away with that too.
See, Aston was listening.
Yep. So there will be a nice gift raffle that will happen for those that participate in the survey.
Awesome. Awesome. Sorry if I just totally set you up there.
Hey, I'll follow through.
Again, hey, thanks everybody. Thank you, Aston and Don and Cord and Jennifer and everybody for making this happen too. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
All right. Take care, y'all.